let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the award-winning podcast where we talk about gaining, fetishism, and everything in their orbit.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we're welcoming to the show for the first time. Today we've got Volkan.
Hello.
Hello, Volk. How are you today?
I'm good. It's a bit hot today, which is very odd for England.
Yeah, it's not my favourite. I don't like it. No, the heat. It's not great. Not a fan. I love a fan, but I am not a fan of heat. So if Jesus could fucking stop this bullshit, would be much.
You grew up on the equator.
Yeah, and I left for a reason. It's hot and it's horrible, but we're here today with Volkan to talk about something very exciting. We're talking about Ayna Therapies.
Yes.
Which I'm very excited to get into. Are you ready to get into it today?
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. Fabulous. So, first and foremostly, how long have you been a counsellor for?
Officially, 2 months. Unofficially, a year and 2 months. Super unofficially, my whole life. Because I've always been that person that someone comes to talk to about what their problems are.
So, I've known you for a little bit, and I've always found your narrative really, really fascinating because you seem to exist the intersection of so many different experiences. And from what you and I have talked about, Ayna Therapies is kind of an opportunity to bring all that together and reach out to a lot of different people. So I feel like we could kind of delve into each branch kind of on their own, really, to get a bit of a firmer understanding. Mm-hmm. So to kick things off, you are someone who is hard of hearing and not specifically deaf, correct?
Correct.
What are those distinctions and definitions? Because it's something that I feel like I know for myself I'm not too versed with, so I imagine probably a lot of people aren't too familiar with. What are they and how are they distinct?
Okay, so deafness is pretty simple. You can't hear anything. But it does come on a scale. So if we look at a audiogram, which is what the audiologist plots your hearing levels, that ranges from normal hearing all the way down to profound deafness. So a hearing loss would be anywhere before the profound bracket.
Right.
So you would have a hearing loss that makes you mildly deaf, or you'll be mild hearing loss.
Right. So it's a spectrum of an experience, everywhere from a little bit of hard of hearing all the way down to can't hear much of anything, and that's all kind of on the hard of hearing spectrum. And then you've got the whole nothing's registering.
Yeah. So if you're profoundly deaf, you can't hear an aeroplane whilst you're standing next to it, and those motherfuckers are loud. So as a deaf person, you wouldn't be able to hear that. You'd be able to feel the vibrations that come from it, because sound is a vibration. But for a person with hearing loss, it can vary depending on where their hearing is and what hurts and stuff like that.
Okay. And so when it comes to this idea of therapy, and more specifically like counselling, I suppose, to be clear, what kind of therapy and counselling do people really look for when it comes to being a person who is either hard of hearing or profoundly deaf?
So there isn't in the UK, it's not accessible to someone who's deaf or has hard of hearing on different levels. It's a very sought after skill to have, to be able to work with a deaf person or a person with hearing loss. So there are some charities that can help, but their waiting list is now getting longer and longer.
That's a wider conversation, I think, on, the state of the United Kingdom at this stage with the NHS and with all manner of health services waiting lists out the gate. So it behooves people to have someone like yourself who offers services for people who require more specialized counseling.
Yeah, so in my previous life, I was a sign language interpreter. Kind of still am till my hands get hung up. But we don't have enough people who can sign.
Hmm.
So in the UK, we use British Sign Language. It's different everywhere. And we don't have enough therapists who can sign to a level of proficiency to be able to provide therapy. And when it comes to people with hearing loss, some people will have speech, some people will lip read, which is bloody difficult because only 30% of words are on your lips. And then there's the environmental factors. So I once was with therapists who had two-toned walls. That background noise made it hard for me to focus on her lips.
Two-toned walls, what does that mean?
So it's half of it is dark blue, the other half is white or light blue or whatever.
So even like the color of a wall could affect your ability to hear and decipher what someone's saying to you verbally.
Because my focus is on lip reading. I have to lip read.
Right, and because of that color difference, it might make it difficult to like, okay.
It becomes what's called a visual pollution. It's polluting the visual space. So having, for example, here we've got a bookcase with books and pictures, and that would be a distraction.
Right, because you're trying to focus on lips and the specific movements, but then you've got all this other stuff
That takes my
crowding
attention.
around. See, it's things like that where, because obviously, you know, we're sat in a home space, this is how you decorate a home space. And yet having someone who is hard of hearing who may be looking to lip read to better understand what's going on puts them at an unnecessary disadvantage in that way and creates visual clutter when it comes to trying to have a proper conversation. I imagine most people wouldn't think of things like this. Like, Tim, to put to you here as a nurse, do you find that you often are having to navigate patients with disabilities of maybe specifically like being hard of hearing or profoundly deaf?
Well, yeah, physical disabilities, absolutely, like amputated limbs or people who have suffered a stroke, so like they can't move one side of their body. As far as hearing disabilities, like mostly with the population that I take care of, it's hard of hearing, but most of them have hearing aids. I've had a few that have had the cochlear implant, and I don't think I've had any patients that were profoundly deaf yet. But even if I did, I can tell you right now, in the setting that I'm in, there are no resources. What they would essentially do is hand me a book full of pictures of sign language, and they would expect me to be able to fluently, convey whatever I need to the patient just from looking at these pictures. They wouldn't send in someone to do sign language for us. They wouldn't do something over video. They would just expect us to do it all ourselves. Because when we get someone who doesn't speak English as a first language, they hand us again a book with common phrases that we're supposed to decipher or pictures that we're like, they will literally give us a picture board of things like hungry, in pain, need the bathroom, things like that. And we're just supposed to point at it and go, is this what you need? Is this what you need? Like they're kindergartners. I fucking hate that that's how it's set up. I think it's so ridiculous and it's such a disservice to the patients, but it all comes down to money, unfortunately.
Mm,
And going off that point, working in the medical industry, in the UK, we've got the NHS, the National Health Service. The government funds translations and interpreting for people, but only 0.1% of that is used for sign language. So even a deaf person finds it difficult to get an interpreter to come in, but a spoken language person has their interpreter prepared for them. So there's a lot of struggles that a deaf person faces, not just mental health wise, but physical health as well.
mm. I mean, it's so interesting, Tim, the way you said that. Like, we just have a board where you have to point and say, hungry, poop time, pain. Like, it's so interesting that the moment you lose what we perceive to be the most common way of communicating, it devolves so quickly into this infantilization of,
Exactly. I was just going to say that it's so infantilizing to take in a picture board that has like a picture of a toilet, a picture of like a food plate, a picture of a glass of water, and point at it to a person who is probably, I mean, it depends again on their age and other things that are going on, but like, if they are of sound mind and body, they're going to look at you like, what is this? What are you doing? I'm not a child. Like, I would feel humiliated as a patient if that's what someone came into the room with.
Which also probably explains why there are people who don't go out and seek help, because in their mind they think, well, what good is this help? Or is this help even respectful to receive? Or will it even be fruitful to do? So bringing it back to what you're looking to do with Ayna Therapies is actually quite incredible, really. And I know
Thank
that
you.
I know that you're in that process of starting to put yourself out there and spread the word, of course, and get people interested in that kind of intersectional uh, service. From what you've observed, is there much out there that meets the needs, much like Ina seeks to do?
As in organizations providing therapy in sign, or
Yeah.
yeah. There's one organization that does, and like I said, their waiting list is atrocious. There isn't enough therapists out there who can sign.
Mm.
So the concept behind what I'm doing was brought by one of my sign language clients when I was working with her. She was looking for a therapist and she couldn't find anyone. We eventually found someone that was somewhat appropriate until she got there and he couldn't sign. But he advertised as being able to work with deaf people, which he couldn't do. So if I look at this statistically, I mean, I'm not a mathematician or anything like that. There's 12 million BSL users in the UK. As a therapy group of people, therapists, we are missing out on 12 million people. We are discounting 12 million people and their requirements for a better life.
Mm.
So my mission is get all my qualifications out of the way and then train people to be able to sign in therapy as well, because there's 12 million out there and I can't see them all.
Wow. It's one of those things that you just, and I hate that this is such a privileged thing to say, but you don't think about until you're faced with that person or that conversation. And it's one of those things where I often reflect on being like a kid in Australia and wondering, like, there are so many different indigenous groups around. Why aren't we like learning their language? Like, this is such a cool and unique thing to learn, like local to an area that gives you like a taste of culture and like an appreciation for the land that you live on. Same thing with sign language. It surprises me that they don't make it something that is so much more easily accessible in schools or even like a mandatory thing.
And that's the funny part about like over here in the US, like you are in, well, and again, this is state by state, and this is just, it's so aggravating. So when I was in grade school, we were not required to take a second language. We weren't required to do that until we got to high school. That's when you had to take a second language. And you were only required one semester of a foreign language. So I took 2 semesters of French. Can't remember how to say much. Definitely didn't get to be conversational with it. Because then once you get to college, there it's just a free for all, and they're like, well, you can study whatever the hell you want. We don't require you to learn. Like it's all degree focused at that point. Whatever degree you choose, that tailors the classes that you will take. But they have introduced the idea of making a second language mandatory in grade schools, and some of them have complied. But then you get all of these redneck assholes that live in this country that say, oh, we speak English over here. That's our language. That's America's language. No, actually, the number one language spoken in the United States is
Right.
Spanish.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about goddamn time that we start teaching children another fucking language. Okay, we have to integrate with the rest of the world.
Yeah, give them a skill. And it's funny, I remember speaking when I worked at XXL for a time, I came across a person who was hard of hearing and they were trying to sign to me at the counter. And honestly, I was just like, I actually didn't know if they were drunk or not because they were just gesticulating. I had no idea what these hand motions were, and I was like, the fuck. And then my friend had come over and very graciously stepped me aside and then did something like to the lips and then a number on the hand, and this person nodded. Money was exchanged, a vodka soda was provided, and I was like, the fuck? And he was like, no, this is brilliant. Like, apparently there are like short courses you can do in London, like depending on your industry, if you're using very simple vernacular, how to learn how to say simple phrases and complete it, do whatever. Because like also you don't have to just use sign language if you are hard of hearing and or deaf. Like I worked in a nightclub. It would have been lovely to flap my arms about and get some signals across to the other side of the room without having to shout at a bitch to be like, fucking move! Like that would have been very effective.
I can't believe it in my profession that they don't offer us language courses for free because think about this. We are nurses, we serve the public. There are thousands of languages out there. America, this big melting pot, tons of people who speak different languages, and they expect us to go in speaking only our native language, English, and that we're just supposed to be able to figure everything out from there. You know, again, with picture books and phrases that we don't know how to pronounce because we've never been taught. It pisses me off that like resources could be provided and they're just not. And how am I supposed to give effective care to a patient if I can't communicate with them?
Mm, my gosh. I mean, I feel like there's such an important conversation that must be had there. And when it comes to like gaining or even just the plus size experience at large, I wonder what kind of a difference of effect there is. And maybe that's the next avenue to pivot towards. You identify as a bear, you are a gorgeous bearish man. And when it comes to that framework within therapy, like how does that flavor what you do? What kind of specifics are there when you think about plus size queer men and the need for counseling?
I've not really thought about that part a lot, but I do notice a lot of fat shaming within the therapy world. It's getting better, it's not the best. I think we are starting to have a shift in fat phobia when it comes to therapy. I am a fat therapist, and it kind of makes clients a lot more comfortable because I don't see one size as a client. They would step into the room or onto the screen as they are. And if I am as I am, we're on a mutual playing ground. Whether they are fat, slim, gaining, losing, we're on the same playing field. And the main thing in my practice of psychotherapy and counselling is I'm okay, you're okay. And if as long as we can come from that level of understanding as a principle, we can achieve a lot.
See, I think that's a beautiful way to approach things because, you know, obviously you're aware of my gaining, you're aware of gainers, and just that a simple approach to say it doesn't matter of the size of the person gaining or losing. It is about who are you, what are you looking for, coming to a mutual space in the middle. And I do feel like as members of a wider plus size community, especially when you think of the bear space, there often feels like this sort of self-imposed segregation of, nah, just because it works for the twinks doesn't mean it'll work for us. We need our own thing. And I do think sometimes, yes, it is good to have bear things, but then therapy. What is required here? What are the parameters that we need to adhere to? I mean, Tim, again, to throw it back to you here, when you think of the idea of pursuing potential therapy as a man who's growing, does that bring up any concerns for you, for someone you might have to talk to, or for the kinds of conversations you might need to be cognizant of?
Well, I suppose the only thing that I would be afraid of is that, like anyone else, even therapists can have their personal opinions about things, and though they are obviously not supposed to inject their personal opinions, not all therapists are unscrupulous. So I would not want to be in a therapy session with someone who believed that my lifestyle or the fact that I wanted to gain and them seeing it as a negative and them trying to get me away from it, you know?
And in fact, that's probably a really good question to ask there. How do you best navigate your own biases when you're doing therapy?
A lot of therapy. A lot of therapy. As a therapist, we need to have in our training at least 40 hours a year of therapy. So we kind of overdose on therapy. But then I come from the place of who am I to judge someone else's choices in life? Because we all have choices. And as when Tim was answering the question you asked him, I remembered a conversation on a Facebook post in a therapy group. And they were asking about gaining and how do you work with that? And you see so many different comments around pathologizing. You need to look out for the best interest of your client. They have to lose the weight rather than gain the weight. And then there was comments about fetish, I can't say the word.
Fetishization?
That's the word, around being big. So I kind of chimed in. And I was like, why do we need to pathologize? Why does it have to be a kink? Can we not see the person beneath the skin? Because that is how I approach every client. Your outer shell really doesn't matter to me. It's the essence of you that I'm working with. And hopefully that never changes. But there is a huge judgment within the therapy groups around the abnormal, air quotes, behaviors, such as binge eating, under eating. But funnily enough, someone who is anorexic or bulimic doesn't get the same response as someone who binge eats or overeats or gains. There is a complete different response. One has a lot more compassion, which is the anorexia and bulimia, and the other one has a lot more vilification. So fat phobia in the therapy world is still huge, but it's slowly shifting because people are asking about gaining abs. I actually referred a therapist to Grommr to gain a better understanding of what gaining is.
Wow.
Because I'm not an official gainer, I'm a natural gainer. I don't go out to eat and get big. So step into the community, find out about it. As therapists, we have to train ourselves outside of the training room, and we can't expect our clients to teach us. So you have to go out and educate yourself. In the UK, we call it CPD, and that can be any form of continual professional development. In the States, it's called CE, continual education. So as therapists, I think we need to have an openness to the intersections of people, because that's where we are heading as people, as therapists, as clients, because we are not just a white guy. We are not just a brown guy. We are a white gainer, a white ginger gainer, yeah, a white Australian ginger gainer. We've got lots of different parts of us that makes us whole. Let's not focus on just one part and look at the whole person. That's my tangent for the day. I shall go home now.
No, not tangential at all. Honestly, I think this conversation around intersectionality, and it kind of comes back to, oh gosh, Kathy Burke. It's that clip of hers where she sat there on the couch and she basically says, this whole woke thing, everyone's talking about, it's so terrible to be woke. Fuck that. Be woke, kids. Like, what would you rather, be woke or be a fucking cunt? And it's like, yeah. Like, those are your options. Either, like, address the intersectional, multifaceted experience of a person, or accept the fact that what you're bringing to the table is insufficient to the conversation that is needed to happen, both to care for the people that are here to have the conversation and also to move the conversation forward. I think we might need to bring you back for some of these chats.
I mean, I was just at a conference over the weekend and we had Dr. Dwight Turner doing the keynotes, and he was talking about intersections and how sometimes we're just valued on particular elements. And there was one thing that I really didn't realize, that in a lot of cultures, especially Western, maybe some Eastern cultures, women are only valued based on their fertility. And we can't just reduce women down to their reproductive system.
Yeah, big surprise. They are actual full humans attached to those baby maker machines.
They are.
And to all our lady listeners, you are loved. Please know that. And once again, as I like to do every now and again, we would like to encourage you to come onto the podcast to share your experiences, because while we love all our ladies who have appeared on the show thus far, there is always room for more. So please reach out to us at thiccradio@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. The only point I'd like to add here before we move on is if any of your therapist friends ask you questions about gaining or put out things, please feel free to link them to the podcast, because I feel like at this stage we are still probably the most comprehensive, guidance on the concept of, I don't know, normative thought rather than just, gooning over pictures of fatties. Which, no judgment, that was me last night. But today, no, here, therapy talks.
I'll send them over to have a jiggle.
Girl, that's me every night. You know that's me every night. I hit the dab pen and then I just go to town.
That's it. There have been a couple of times, bless, where I have called you, Tim, and you basically sent me a rough message to be like, no, and I'm like, oh, okay. I'll message you in 30 minutes.
Daddy's busy.
Oh my goodness. Now listen, I think another good thing we need to talk about here, another important intersection for yourself, is your ethno-spiritual identity. You are a Muslim man, correct?
Yeah, I think we're getting there.
We're getting there.
We're getting there. I'm still exploring my own identity, my own spiritual practices, my own religious beliefs. It's still a bit up in the air, but I don't think that plays an important role in how I am as a therapist at the moment. Maybe if I was to get a bit deeper into religion, it would. But being a brown guy, the expectation is you are Muslim, and with that comes a lot of the connotations of being Muslim. Unfortunately, I don't walk around with a bomb under my top. The only thing that I've got is a belly and some nice titties. But otherwise, religion doesn't really come into the practice so much. If it comes in for my clients, it comes in for my clients, and I work with that.
That's perfectly fair. And we've had a number of religious-themed conversations, or rather spiritual conversations, I should say, with the podcast over the years, talking to different people about their different experiences. I'm curious to know, were you raised Muslim, going to a mosque, participating in Eid and any other number of traditional Muslim practices?
So I was brought up, I'm going to say culturally Muslim, rather than religiously Muslim.
So it's more like the garb and the food, but not the church type of thing?
Yeah, I guess. Because culturally, we are Muslim. We practice Muslimness, Islam. I've never had an official conversion in that sense. But yes, I used to go to the mosque. I did Ramadan from the age of 6 to 16, and then I stopped up until the last one. I do Eid because we get money, so you kind of want to do that. But that's about it. So it's a slow burner at the moment. I'm more into spiritual practices based around energy and stuff like that. Less so around this is what God is.
No, that makes perfect sense. And like I say, we've had definite spiritual conversations before, and I do think it's interesting to consider where our spiritual upbringings or the things in which we're raised in influence us, even at a stage of life where we don't consider that we practice things or that we consider different ideals, we still carry certain threads of ideas with us. So I think regardless of what has influenced you in your past or not, the person sitting before me is this gorgeous brown man who brings so much of himself to every conversation. Even in the quieter moments with you and I, you've always given me a lot of grace and space to have my feelings, have my thoughts, and I've always felt very buoyed and supported by you, which is a wonderful thing to have in a friend, and honestly, just to anyone listening, a great quality in a therapist, obvious. So, therefore, hit up the man.
Book with me.
Give him the job. He deserves your dollars. Though they will be accepted as Great British pounds, and pay him accordingly, according to the conversion, please.
But unfortunately, I cannot work with anyone in the States or Canada.
Because your certification does not transfer, right?
No, because the States have their own licensing per state, and Canada has a quite similar approach, and my insurance does not cover me to work with them.
Wow. So get yourselves over here and then book him up for a service.
Unless you're from, the Arab states, I've got a special rate just for you.
There you go. There you go. Pay attention. And I'm curious to delve a little here, because as you talked a bit before, people have put out questions about gainers, and obviously you are you describe yourself as like a natural gainer, an unintentional gainer. How do you feel, just on a personal level, how do you feel you relate to the gainer community? Do you feel like there's a kinship there for you that you relate to, or is it a bit more alien to your own lived experience?
So if I was to compare gainers to bears, for some reason there is a split between the two. I definitely feel a lot more welcomed into the gainer groups, because there isn't that level of judgment. Because what I find with bears is we've now transitioned into muscle is the only bear type. Whereas for me, a bear is any large guy, hairy, not always hairy. But in the gayners community, there seems to be a lot more of an acceptance and a lot more of, I'm trying to put it into layman terms rather than psychological terms. Fuck it, I'll just use psychological terms. Strokes. There's a lot more strokes, which is basically a way of being recognised.
Right.
So I could post a picture on Grommr or Instagram and have things in gainer hashtags, and I'd get a lot of love for it. Put it into the bears, you don't get so much because you don't match the ideal at the moment. So I've kind of gone off the question, which was...
No, but my question was how do you feel like you relate to the idea of gainer culture? And I think you hit on something there that we often underestimate for ourselves, because there is very much a reductionist perspective in bear culture, that there is only one correct way to be. And as much as people can shout that from the heavens, people will shout it and then go right ahead and absolutely adhere to such standards and not challenge them in any way, shape, or form. Whereas in gainer culture, I know many of us will express a sense of chagrin. We'll go, oh, I wish my body was more like this, X, Y, Z. But it does not matter what shape your fat manifests as. There is guaranteed to be some bitch, and a many number of some bitches, who are absolutely here for the way your belly hangs instead of protrudes, or the way it protrudes rather than the way, they prefer it hard over a soft belly, and they prefer a guy with moobs or a huge ass or a womanly pear shape, or, neck rolls and double chins and all of it. You find all sorts in that space.
I'm going to also add to that, because I have been talking to a few people on Grommr, and there's also the case of, I'm a large guy, but I pad as well, because their body can't reach the size or definition that they want. But then there's a level of shame that comes with having to pad. So even in the gainers community, if you're not the right sort of fat or the right size, and you have to pad, there seems to be a bit of a shame around it. And I don't think shame should be welcomed in any of our communities. Whether that's twinks, bears, muscles, gainers, slimmers, losers, maintainers, we shouldn't have shame. It's not our natural default.
Shame is very much a human invention put on people. And I like that you mentioned that about padding, because we recently spoke with a friend of ours, Josh, Hungry Himbo, if you're listening, babe, who mentioned they like to bloat and sometimes they like to pad, and people will often express a sense of like, oh, well, that's not really gaining. And I understand that maybe it's not in terms of actual weight accrued on the body, but it is still a narrative of fantasy and sexuality that is very natural to all of us. I think I even said at the time, most of us, when we were literal fucking children, let's remember, and were not having access to things, did exactly that. We stuffed pillows under our jumpers. We bloated on soda and whatever the fuck we could get our hands on, because this was the closest we could achieve to fulfilling the realities of a fantasy that were unavailable to us at the time. And those things should never be shamed, because that is the root of a lot of where many of us come from. So thank you for bringing that up.
And it also points to shame as a gay culture. We have a lot of shame, and a lot of that shame is imposed a lot by the straight community as well. If we think about drag queens, for example, drag queens get shamed a lot if they're not fishy enough or womanly enough, or they too much of a comedy queen, or they don't sing. And we kind of see that sort of shame replicated in like the gainers community when it comes to padding.
I have heard people say that about padders and bloaters and all that they're posers. I've heard that said before.
Well, you know what? They can pose and take a picture.
There you are. Goes up on Instagram just like any other. To bring it more back around to Ayna Therapies itself, and again, we've explored several avenues here. Hard of hearing deaf, Muslim, bear, queer, gainer, plus size, da-da-da-da. So much that you have surrounded in. And it brings it all into what you provide with Ayna Therapies. So for the people who are, let's say, in the position where they can afford to, and in a country where they are allowed to request of your services. What is Ayna Therapies all about? What are you offering up as a counselor?
Okay, so I'm going to start by explaining the name. The name is actually quite important because it brings my culture into it. Ayna is the Turkish word for mirror, but also used in Arabic as mirror as well. Now, I'm not an Arab, I am Turkish, but I just like that they mean the same thing. And in therapy, the process is about looking into the mirror, identifying who you are, projecting onto that, reflecting on that, and growing from it so that you can see the difference in the mirror. So that was the concept behind the name. As a therapist, my core theory, I guess, is transactional analysis, which is starting to take a lot more popularity in UK and in Europe, less so in America. And what it does, it really looks at how we're communicating with others, with ourselves and the world. And I like to work in the trenches of your psyche. So I like to delve deep into history. I like to work creatively. So I would use drawings. I'd use projection cards is what they're called. They're basically images on cards and you select which ones feel right and what you get from that image. I work with meditation in the therapy. So I work in a lot of different ways to get to where you want to be. And the one misconception a lot of people have is you go to therapy and the therapist fixes you. You come to therapy so that the therapist can see you. We become what is known as the enlightened witness. We get to know you. We get to see you. We get to hear you. And that might be the only time that ever happens for a person. And out of that relationship, do you birth change, which then floats into the world outside of the room. So that's kind of how I like to work.
Wow.
It's a bit up in the air, but quite grounded.
But also, that's kind of therapy in general, isn't it? I mean, a lot of the conversation around mental health in general, people do tend to cast a very sort of airy-fairy wave of, oh, well, you can't define it, and it's not, this, that, and the other, so it's not, it's that kind of bullshit. So, I mean, for being up in the air, it kind of makes sense in my head that, like, yeah, therapy would be a bit like that. I mean, Tim, let me put it to you like this. We talked a little bit about this today. Like, as an American living in America at a time of the world where there are things that are happening and it makes you feel a type of way, if you were to go and speak to someone about this, what do you think are like the main things you would want to be able to get off your chest?
I guess just the sense of anxiety that so many of us are feeling over, like, this is a very unique year, right? Like, America's had one hell of a year, and it's only half done, right? And we're only, I think, 105 days away from the election, and like, politics is a cesspit right now, culture is a cesspit right now, prices are going up, wages aren't, things are just fucking nuts. And because America has not put an emphasis on mental health, there are so many people who are walking around right now that are just pissed off. So many people are just so fucking angry. And we don't have anybody to talk to about it except the people around us. And so, like, if that's your only resource, you might be talking to somebody else who's also extremely pissed off, and they might be pissed off about something completely different. And you've got this clash of ideals, this, us versus them, this tribalism shit. And it just, you feel like quagmired in it. And like, I have friends that are very, very sensitive that have expressed to me they just have no hope for the future. They're just like, how am I going to get up and go to work when all I see is just this chaos going on all around me? And then you've got people on the other side of that who are like, yeah, well, there's chaos, but you got to be useful. You got to get up. You got to go to work. You got to be a productive member of society. Like, get your shit together, kid. And what do you do with that? And most insurance companies, if you have medical insurance, will pay for, I think, 4 visits with a therapist. I think that's the max that they'll do. And then you have to start paying for it. And it's expensive. I think it's like the average cost of a therapy session is $150 per session.
You need to have a diagnosis as well in order for the insurance to pay for it.
Yes. And sometimes they won't qualify that either. It just depends on what you're diagnosed with. If it's something that needs medical help, like a medication, then they might be more willing to work with you. But if you're just going for talk therapy, they're like, oh, well, if you can't figure out what's wrong with you in 4 sessions, that's it. You know?
Well, let me put it to you here, Volk. If someone, and of course, as you say, you're not certified for America, so you can't necessarily speak to all that. But let's say someone has all those feelings and they're here in the UK, how would they go about reaching out and finding a suitable therapist, someone like yourself?
Okay, so in the UK, we have a bunch of membership bodies and we have a bunch of directories. In the UK, there's 3 main membership bodies that have a register of people. That doesn't mean that they're quality people. You have to interview them. So that's the BACP, the UKCP, and the NCPS. They have a register. And then you've got the directories. The most common directory that people are on is called counselling directories. And you can filter through gender, location, the type of therapy that they provide, the modality that they work in. So you can be quite specific. But again, I will always say interview your therapist before you work with them, because you need to make sure that you match.
What does that look like? So do I rock up on session 1, like I guess the kind of introductory session, and how do I interview a therapist?
Okay, so a lot of therapists, me included, offer a free half an hour or 15 minutes discovery call, is what I call it, where you just sit down, you explain why you're coming to therapy, what do you want to get out of it, what's your experience of therapy, and what do you want from me? And we'll talk about how you want to work. If our values in that align, then I would say we've got a good start together. If they say to me, I want cognitive behavioral therapy with homework, I can instantly say to them, that's not me. I don't do cognitive behavioral therapy, and I don't set homework on a regular basis because I don't think that's necessary. Sometimes it is. And the reason people would choose something like CBT is because they claim to be the most evidence-based therapy, but a lot of other therapies are evidence-based as well. And I don't think behavior is the key to cure. So yeah, when I interviewed my therapist, I kind of decided I definitely want an older male therapist. I've had female therapists in the past, but I know that my issues, I need to work with a man. I know that I need them to be this level of qualification because I need it for my course. But also you get a feel of the therapist. I've interviewed many male therapists and I found even their voice does not do it for me.
Like if someone's too softly spoken, you might be like, nah, not cutting the mustard.
Therapeutically, I was not turned on by their voice, put it that way.
Okay.
I spoke with one male therapist who was very, I will walk with you in this sessions.
Oh no, that would not work for me, honey. I'd be asleep.
I need someone to say, right, so what's up? Tell me what's going on. I need that sort of assertiveness in the voice. I need that tone of, I know my shit. I don't want an airy-fairy therapist. Even though I am airy-fairy, I don't project that.
Right. And it's also acknowledging, it's not saying that that style of voice or therapy is in itself bad, but it's saying
Absolutely
like
not.
that's just what works for you.
For me, that voice does not work.
And in a way, it makes sense that, and Tim, we've kind of talked about this a little bit in the more general sense, I suppose, for a different number of people. Like, a lot of people don't feel a sense of advocating for themselves in things that they need. They just sort of hold out their hands like Oliver Twist. Gruel gets poured into the bowl, slops on their face, acidically burns their skin a little bit, and they go, "Oh, yes, master, please, thank you ever much more. Please, my lord, if I be so deserving a worm that I am." Like, so much of the world kind of encourages us to kind of be this, to just kind of accept whatever's lopped in our faces. But actually, to get the best out of therapy, especially when you are spending, in some instances, so much money, it behooves you to say, no, this is not sufficient. I need this thing. This will work for me. And in terms of figuring that out for yourself, like you say, you talk to a therapist, you see if that's a match. If you don't know beforehand, is there certain questions that people should ask themselves about what they're looking for in a therapist?
Yes. I would say if you're looking on a counselling directory, make sure they have a photo, because the photo will tell you if you like that person. We judge someone in less than 10 seconds of seeing them, and you need to listen to that gut feeling. Do I like this person that I'm seeing? Before you even click on their profile. A lot of cultures might not allow that to happen, so I'm thinking Islamic cultures, they might not allow for a female therapist to have her photo on display. Then I would look through their profile and see if I can feel what type of person they are. Are they someone who provides safety? And you will see a lot of therapists say, I provide a safe environment for you to come and talk about all your worries. Yes, well, you know that that's the standard in therapy. But does that safety run through the 4 paragraphs that they've written?
Right.
Do they have skills in what I'm working with? Am I coming with PTSD? Am I coming with depression? Am I coming with a recent HIV diagnosis? Can they work with that? Am I coming with a recent hearing loss? Am I coming with a trauma? Am I coming as a child of a deaf adult?
Am I coming with gaming and looking to explore within myself and determine, is this the right mode for me?
So it really is about, am I willing to pay this person for that 50-minute session? Will they be worth it? And even after 4 sessions, if it's not, you can leave. There's nothing tying you in. I even say in my discovery calls, are you speaking to any other therapists? If the answer is no, I encourage you to go and look at other therapists. It's because they might be a better fit for you than I am. Now, that might be a really big disservice to me, but if I'm not the right person, I want you to find the right person.
And it makes sense that in an industry like therapy, yes, you're there, it is a job, you will make money off that job. Your mission as creating this and being a therapist is not so specifically to make money that it is at the disadvantage of someone else.
Therapy is all about the client coming into autonomy. The client coming into their own power, in a sense. I don't want you to not have autonomy in choosing who you work with. If you choose to work with me, go for it. If you choose not to, I hope you find someone that's a better fit. I would suggest everyone goes to therapy. Therapy is not a crisis response. Therapy is a preventative response. We shouldn't wait till we are in the depths of depression to find a therapist, because a therapist can help prevent depression, can help cope with anxiety. And as far as what I'm aiming to do, I don't know. I want to be able to provide services to a wide range of people. And my specialism will be deaf people, because that's what I'm in. I might do a lot more training, become a supervisor, become a trainer. I want to get my international qualification. But everything's going to have its time.
I love that. And you make sure to keep us posted on that international qualification, because the listeners will want to be able to come to you for this.
Yeah, but I still won't be able to work with the Americans.
What, an international... Really? An international qualification won't work in America?
Because they have state-by-state licensing.
Well, never mind, America. But if anyone else... If anyone else out there is listening, once we get the international things sorted, of course, be in touch. But listen, I want to ask here as a final question, what do you see for the future? I know you were telling us you want to do some training and just kind of see who comes forward. But in terms of this line of work for you, what do you see for the future of that?
I see really big changes taking place. I have always said to my colleagues, we are the young voices of psychotherapy. If we don't make the changes that we want to see, it will never happen. So that starts off with that intersectional lens that we were talking about earlier, and seeing people for more than just that one presentation. because there's so much more to each individual. And I'm hoping that therapies become a lot more holistic in their approach, rather than this is what the DSM-5 or the ICD-11 says, therefore that's the only thing. So even stuff like personality disorders, narcissism, they're coming out of the DSM-5. So they won't be in the DSM-6 because research has shown all of this is a trauma response.
Wow.
So bipolar disorder will become a non-existent in psychiatric world because it's a trauma response. Dissociation is a trauma response. If we can work with the trauma, we don't have to medicate so much.
Wow.
And I'm not saying medication bad, but we don't need to always be medicated.
I mean, Tim, you are on that fucking pulpit preaching the word on that.
Yeah. We have a tendency to overuse psychotropics.
Yeah.
And psychotropics, if they genuinely work for you, if they're meant for you, if you genuinely have a chemical imbalance of some kind in your neurotransmitters, these can really help. But I think the propensity to just toss a pill at someone and say, oh, well, you've got BPD, let's put you on Klonopin and Ativan and all these other psychotropics, and they have some terrible side effects. I mean, some psychotropics can actually increase the symptoms of your problem. So I agree that we do need to work more on the trauma, the actual like triggering event of whatever it is you're going through, rather than just saying, oh, well, you're fucked up, so here's a bunch of meds that's going to cost you a fortune and drive you nuts and cause a bunch of other physical ailments. And by the time you're in your 60s, we're going to toss you in a nursing home because we don't know where else to put you.
Even with stuff like OCD, which is actually an anxiety attack, a high-level anxiety attack. The medication for that is anti-anxiety medication, but it's still not treating what started the OCD, what started the anxiety.
As much as this is such a difficult place to be in with medications and mental health and all that, what a beautiful thing to suggest that the future is with this new generation of therapists, people who are coming to terms with biases and leaning into the intersectional, leaning into the research into therapy practice and actually what can we do to better people's lived experiences rather than just to medicate and all of that. And I think the reason I really want to end on a note like this, especially for this episode, you know, for our listeners out there, one of the biggest things in gaining that people come back to is this some kind of fucked up mental disorder? The thing is, I don't think it is. But I think for the people who feel that there is a need to go and see a therapist and actually dig through this for themselves and understand it in themselves, what a beautiful notion that to potentially find a new therapist might mean finding someone who helps you to understand its place in your life. So if you're listening out there and you have made no efforts to step into gaining because you have these fears or concerns, maybe now is the time. Look to find a therapist. Find someone to talk to who could help you to discern the truth within yourself. It may very well be the case that for some people, the ideas of gaining could be a variation of a trauma response. Or it could just be a part of who you are. But maybe finding a therapist is the way you find out.
And gaining is okay.
Yeah. Getting fat is actually not terrible.
There's a lot worse things that you could be doing to yourself. A lot worse things.
But if we come from a space of this is okay and I'm okay, we're not going to be coming from a dark place.
I love that. Oh, Volkan, this has been an incredible episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for all your time today. So first of all, where can listeners find Ayna Therapies online and how can they get in touch with you?
So for Ayna Therapies, you can just do ayna.therapies into Instagram. I'll be there. And for email, because I don't have a website at the moment, that's a work in progress. It will still be ayna.therapies@gmail.com and we can have a chat. I'm not going to share my other posts because I think that will become an ethical consideration if anyone looks at that and then wants therapy.
Yes, that's a very, very good point. So in that case, because you all aren't going to get to see this man, I will just describe him for you. He is thick and gorgeous, brown and delicious, and scrumdiddlyumptious, which is not a word I've said in many years.
And it's not a British saying either.
You'd think it would be because of, what was it, like
Mary Poppins.
Was it Mary? No, it was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, right?
Yeah, it was Willy Wonka.
Yeah. Who can make a sunrise? A scrumdiddlyumptious bar, that was the one.
Yeah.
Not that I ever figured out what a scrumdiddlyumptious bar was. I'm just saying scrumdiddlyumptious because someone
I
else...
think it's I think it's like a Nestle's Crunch. I think it's like chocolate with Rice Krispies in it.
Oh,
I think.
fair enough.
Because they did actually make, because Wonka is also a candy company, so I think they have actually made the Scrumdiddlyumptious bar, and I think it's just like a Nestle's Crunch.
Wow. I'm just looking forward to someone else having to write the transcripts and try to write out scrumdiddlyumptious 10,000.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do that.
Yes, you will. But that's it for another week here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave us a good review. Now, if you liked this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, please share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BlueSky at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at ThickyMouse. You can also look us up on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc Radio, or at our website at podpage.com/Thicc Radio. If you want to submit a voice note or become a financial supporter of the show, you can find the links in the show notes, and you can always write to us at thethickradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Enter app podcast produced by Stannnum and Thicky Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify.